Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut for getting straight to the core insights, cutting through all the noise. Today, we're taking a really deep plunge into the world of teams. It's often misunderstood, right? We're pulling a lot of wisdom from Leigh Thompson's Making the Team, a guide for managers. And our mission really is to give you a powerful mental toolkit to help you understand not just how teams should work, but, the surprising reality of how they actually function, how they succeed, how they sometimes stumble. Think of this as like your personal decoder ring for what makes group efforts actually tick.
Yeah, and it's really crucial to point out that what we're talking about today isn't just someone's opinion or, some feel-good mantra. This book, it's rigorously rooted in scientific theory, lots of empirical research behind it. So
Yeah.
the strategies we're going to unpack, they're evidence-based. We'll look at why teams are just indispensable now, but also, interestingly, when they might actually be the wrong tool for the job.
Okay, let's jump right in then. We throw the word team around constantly, don't we? Especially at work. Everyone's chasing that dream team idea.
Yeah.
But for you, our listener, who's already pretty savvy about this stuff, what does the research actually say an effective team looks like? And why are companies so invested in this model right now?
That's the perfect place to start. Because it's not just any group working together, is it? A team, at its core, it's really a collection of people with increasingly specialized skills, interdependent expertise, and they're all committed to a shared goal, often a pretty complex one. Now, the reasons, they're everywhere. They're profound. First big one, information technology. The pace is just relentless. Customers have instant access to everything. Product knowledge, service info, it just ramps up competition like crazy.
Oh, okay. So better informed customers mean companies have to innovate faster, and that often takes bringing different minds together.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which leads right into the second driver, competition itself. Companies are just locked in these aggressive battles for market share and getting the best out of teams. That's often the only way to get an edge. Think about the original Apple iPhone team. That was over 200 engineers directly on it, thousands involved across functions. The source paints this picture of like a whirlwind, coordinated activity, apps needing to work perfectly together, engineers pulling all-nighters, managers pushing deadlines, and the tension. Apparently arguments would just erupt in the hallways. It was that intense. Without that kind of, well, maybe messy, but intense teamwork, the iPhone just wouldn't exist as we know it.
Wow, that really paints a picture. High stakes, serious complexity. But beyond tech and competition, what else is pushing organizations towards using teams so much?
Well, there's the whole reality of globalization and culture. I mean, diverse multinational teams are just becoming standard practice now. And internally, you've got multi-generational teams, different age groups working together, bringing unique skills, different perspectives. That's more and more common.
Okay, so it sounds like teams are kind of the silver bullet. But the book points out early on, pretty directly, that they're not always the answer. And maybe even more critically, managers often get it wrong when they try to figure out why a team failed. What are some of those classic mistakes leaders make?
Oh, it's a really common trap. Managers often genuinely don't recognize their own basic responsibilities in building the team. And that just leads to frustration, discord, The source gives some classic examples, like a company with deep leadership problems. They tried a team-building retreat, played some games, but it did nothing because they never actually tackled the process of how they work together day to day.
Right. Just playing games isn't going to fix underlying issues.
Exactly. And another sort of unusual one involved a nonprofit director. Staff conflict was high, so she had them go out in the woods, stand in a circle, and literally hold a stone while venting negative feelings. Unsurprisingly, the discord didn't exactly vanish.
So the key insight there is you can't just wave a wand and call a group a team. You have to understand the actual mechanics underneath.
Precisely. And another thing the research shows, which might seem counterintuitive, conflict isn't always bad. If you manage it well, that disagreement, that tension, can actually be the thing that helps leverage different viewpoints, gets you to really creative solutions. And here's a real kicker. Strong directive leadership. Not always needed for strong teams. In fact, sometimes having that traditional leader can actually threaten the team's autonomy. The book calls it the leadership paradox. The research really stresses that actively experimenting with failures is vital. Make mistakes. Learn fast. That's how you forge better teams.
That's a huge shift in thinking. And speaking of autonomy, you mentioned teams exist on a spectrum. Can you walk us through the different types based on how much freedom they have?
Sure thing. The book breaks it down into 4 types. At the lowest end, autonomy-wise, you've got manager-led teams. Here, the manager sets the goal, spells out the work. Pretty straightforward. They have low startup costs, which is good, but they can run into problems like Diffusion of responsibility. Nobody feels truly accountable. Or group conformity. Think of surgical teams, flight crews, maybe even historical examples like the Entebbe rescue, where one leader directs everything.
Okay, and as they get more freedom.
Next up are self-managing teams. They get autonomy over their day-to-day work. They handle the how, but usually not the what. Then you have self-directing teams. They manage their processes, and they define their own objectives, their strategies. And finally, the highest level of autonomy is self-governing teams. They basically set their own overall direction, almost like mini businesses within a larger company. Generally, yeah, more autonomy tends to mean higher motivation, more involvement. But the manager does give up direct control, and you have to ensure alignment with the bigger picture.
Got it. So once we get these different structures, the next obvious question is, how do companies know if these teams are actually working well? How do we measure team effort and reward it, especially beyond just did they finish the task?
Yeah, it's definitely a more nuanced measurement than just output. The book suggests looking beyond just achieving goals. It lays out 4 key criteria. First, and yeah, probably the most important, is productivity. Did the team actually hit its goals? That's the core output. But then you need to look at cohesion. How well does the team stick together? They support each other. You can have a team that loves working together but doesn't produce much.
Yeah, the happy but ineffective team.
Exactly. Then there's learning. This is about the team's ability to learn from what they do, to adapt, to get better over time. Continuous improvement. And finally, integration. How well does the team connect with the rest of the organization? How well do they collaborate outside their own bubble? Because a super productive team working in isolation might actually hurt the overall company if they're not integrated.
That framework really helps. So if that's how we measure effectiveness, how do we incentivize teams, especially considering those broader factors?
Well, organizations use a few strategies: variable pay and incentive pay are very common, averaging around 2.9% of total compensation in private companies in the survey. And that percentage usually goes up as employees move higher up the ladder and have more control over their work. But here's the critical point. When teams are the main way work gets done, individual reward systems, they just don't make much sense. In those cases, team-based pay is much better fit.
Okay, so the reward structure needs to actually match the reward structure. That makes sense.
Precisely. And it's not just about cash. Non-cash rewards and recognition programs are huge. Something like 86% of organizations are using them back in 2011. Think of Google's peer spot bonuses, colleagues giving each other $175 for their or PricewaterhouseCoopers redeeming for Symantec has lawsuit fees, $25 to $1,000. The key, though, is that the recognition has to be clearly linked to the achievement.
What about something like gain sharing? That sounds like it could have a pretty direct linkage.
Gain sharing can be really powerful. It's where you distribute a portion of the financial gains, like cost savings or productivity boosts, back to the employees. It's great for fostering coordination, getting people to share information, changing attitudes, sparking new ideas. But, and this is a big but, it absolutely has to be collaborative. With the employees involved, they need to really understand the formula and see how their actions directly impact potential gains. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Okay, performance appraisal for individuals is already a minefield, right? But for these self-managed teams, it sounds like it gets exponentially harder. How do organizations even approach that?
You've really hit on a major challenge there. Often, supervisors just aren't close enough to the day-to-day of self-managing, self-directing, or self-governing teams to evaluate them fairly. And here's the paradox. If they did get too involved, too close, it might actually undermine the very autonomy that makes those teams work in the first place. So the real purpose of any measurement system, especially for teams, it should be about helping the team get better, not just judging them. Ideally, truly empowered teams should actually take the lead in designing their own measurement systems.
That's a really important distinction. Measurement to empower, not just to police. What about things like 360-degree evaluations for teams, where everyone gives feedback on everyone else?
Well, in theory, 360-degree evaluations sound great. They offer this rich, multifaceted view. But man, they're fraught with issues. Lack of anonymity is a big one. People fear retaliation, right? Or you get these side deals. I'll rate you well if you rate me well. Yeah. Plus, individual team members might not always have the big picture perspective needed to evaluate their peers fairly against organizational goals.
And then you layer on all the inherent human biases we bring to the table.
Absolutely. The research flags several big rater biases. One is the extrinsic incentives bias. People tend to think other people are more motivated by external stuff, like pay and benefits, than they are themselves. Like in one study, MBA students way overestimated how highly Citibank managers would rank those external motivators. Then there's the communication medium bias. Appraisers actually give poor performers higher ratings face-to-face compared to when they give anonymous written feedback. Isn't that interesting?
Wow. Yeah, we soften the blow in person.
Seems like it. And then you've got reciprocity bias, that unspoken you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours thing, especially hard to avoid in small, tight teams. And finally, the bandwagon bias. People just tend to go along with the group's prevailing opinion about someone.
So we're prone to all these traps when we give feedback. What about when we're on the receiving end?
Yes. That leads us to RATI biases. The big one here is the egocentric bias. Basically, most of us feel under-recognized for our work. We tend to give ourselves more credit than others do. So even if a 360 evaluation is pretty positive overall, people often walk away feeling, well, a bit slighted, underappreciated. To fight this, managers really need to focus feedback on concrete behaviors, not fuzzy attitudes, like saying, you've been late 18 out of the last 20 days. That's objective. It's much harder to argue with than something vague like you lack commitment.
That's a really practical tip. Okay, so we've covered what teams are, how to check if they're working, the feedback minefield. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about deliberately designing a team for success. If you're building a team from scratch, what are the absolute must-haves, the key ingredients?
Right, the foundation. And you could argue the most critical piece is setting clear goals. Wageman's work on Xerox teams. It showed two really common mistakes managers make. Either they fail to set any clear direction at all, or they get bogged down focusing only on the how, the means, instead of the why, the ultimate ends. Goals need to be clear, simple, specify the outcomes you want, but crucially, not dictate the exact methods for getting there. The successful teams at Xerox, for example, they constantly check back against their goals. They'd ask, would this please the customer, and can we do it without excessive cost? Research backs this up consistently. Specific, difficult goals, they lead to higher team performance.
That ends not means distinction feels so important for actually empowering a team. How does the level of autonomy we talked about earlier fit into this design phase?
Team authority is absolutely central here. Like we discussed with those 4 types, generally, more autonomy leads to higher motivation, more engagement. Now, there's a trade-off, obviously. The manager gives up some direct control. There's a risk of misalignment with the bigger organizational goals. But the benefits can be huge. Studies have shown empowered service tech teams. They boosted both quantitative performance and customer satisfaction significantly.
And does the kind of work the team needs to do change how it should be structured?
Oh, definitely. Teams usually fall into one of 3 main task types. You've got tactical tasks, clear, well-defined processes. Think surgical teams, flight crews again, then problem-solving tasks. The team's job is to diagnose an issue and fix it, like a special task force. And finally, creative tasks, where the whole point is generating new ideas, new solutions. Think R&D teams. The team's design, its structure, its size, who's on it, should really flow directly from the nature of that core task.
Okay, what about team size? Is there a magic number? Everyone asks that.
Yeah, leaders always struggle with this one. The general rule of thumb. Aim for the smallest number of people who can actually do the task effectively. Usually that means fewer than 10 members. Managers often make teams too big. And that ties into something called the team scaling fallacy. Basically, as teams get bigger, people consistently underestimate the total person hours needed. Why? Because they focus on the potential gains from more people. More hands make light work, right? But they forget about the coordination losses, which grow exponentially as you add more people. More isn't always better. Sometimes it's just slower.
So a bigger team might actually drag things down.
Interesting. What about time pressure? Is that good or bad for how a team performs?
It's nuanced. When time pressure is genuinely tight, teams often do buckle down, work harder, stay focused. But here's the weird part. If you then give them more time, they often just keep working as if time is still scarce, like they're stuck in that high pressure mode. So it means you need to be careful about how you introduce tasks initially. Set realistic timelines. Avoid creating unnecessary frenzy. And what about the actual people? The skills and the mix of members on the team?
Right. Team member skills. Super important. Cognitive ability is a really consistent predictor of team effectiveness. Studies on military tank crews showed smarter teams just performed better. But it's not just about raw brain power. You need the right mix. Technical skills, definitely, but also interpersonal skills, good decision-making, problem-solving abilities. The book also touches on backing up behavior. That's when teammates kind of step in and help each other out. Discretionary. Sounds good. But it can be costly if it means someone neglects their own main job. Or it can accidentally lead to free riding if people start relying too much on others to pick up the slack.
Okay, last piece on design. Team diversity. It's a massive topic in companies today. How does that play into making a team effective?
Team diversity. Yeah, it's fascinatingly complex. Okay, so national diversity, different countries. Sometimes that can initially hinder how information gets used because of social categorization. We unconsciously group people. But informational diversity, having different knowledge, different perspectives, different skills, that actually increases information sharing, leads to better outcomes. The real key insight here, how diversity affects a team depends a lot on whether the members perceive and value their diversity in terms of individual differences, rather than seeing people primarily through group-level categories like race or gender. So companies need to publicly commit to valuing diversity. Actively ask employees for ideas on how to foster that truly inclusive environment where different viewpoints lead to healthy debate, not just personal clashes.
Okay, so we've designed the team on paper, but then reality hits, right? The messy human interactions. Let's get into those internal team dynamics, the emotions, the relationships, the unwritten rules that kind of shape a team's personality.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. The heart of team functioning. Let's start with trust and respect. These aren't just nice-to-haves. They are absolutely foundational. Teams high in both. They believe their colleagues have valuable things to contribute, and they genuinely feel safe, like people have their back. But the book makes a really sharp distinction. High respect, but low trust. That can lead to a team of brilliant individuals who are just afraid to be vulnerable. They don't really collaborate. On the flip side, high trust, but low respect. That team might feel safe, comfortable, but ultimately ineffective because members don't really see the value in each other's contributions. And research supports this. Higher respect. It tends to increase healthy, task-focused conflict, the good kind of debate, and it decreases relationship conflict. Trust, specifically, seems to reduce process conflict. It smooths out how the work gets done.
That's subtle, but wow, what a crucial distinction for anyone leading a team. How do teams actually build that kind of rapport organically?
Well, one really interesting phenomenon is mirroring. In face-to-face settings, people subconsciously mimic each other. Posture, facial expressions, tone of voice, mannerisms. This subtle, often unconscious imitation. It actually helps people build rapport. It increases trust. It's like this little non-verbal dance that builds connection without us even realizing it.
Fascinating. And what about status? How does hierarchy emerge within a group?
Status. Yeah, it emerges incredibly fast, often within just minutes of people interacting.
Yeah.
And it's based on perceived ability or prestige. This could be based on legitimate things like years on the job, intelligence, education, connections. But it could also be based on what the book calls pseudo-status characteristics, things like sex, age, race, even just someone's demeanor or how confidently they speak. People who are perceived, rightly or wrongly, as having more valuable characteristics, they generally get higher status and more influence in the group.
That's a lot for a team to deal with internally. What happens when the team changes? Someone leaves, a new person joins.
Newcomer integration and turnover. That's a huge constant challenge because every time someone leaves or joins, it disrupts the team's technical knowledge base, its social fabric. The research shows that actively empowering newcomers and having the existing team hold positive expectations about them, those things strongly predict better performance from the new person. And crucially, it also reduces their intention to leave the team later on. So how you welcome and integrate new people, it's absolutely critical.
Okay, what about the unwritten rules, the way we do things around here?
Those are norms, and they are incredibly powerful. These unwritten rules of behavior, they're often developed really quickly, sometimes in the very first meeting. Think about things like, are people expected to be on time? Who tends to speak first? Even where people habitually sit. Once a collective behavior gets established, it kind of sets a precedent. It becomes the norm. And interestingly, when someone violates a norm, the team's first reaction usually isn't to kick them out. It's usually to try and persuade them to get back in line.
Makes sense. And finally, in this internal dynamics piece, what role does coaching play? How does that help optimize things?
Team coaching. It's defined as direct interaction with the team specifically aimed at helping members make coordinated, task-appropriate use of their collective resources. According to the theory by Hackman and Wageman, coaching isn't just about feelings or relationships. It has specific functions. Education, motivation, and consultation focus squarely on the process of performing the task. It's about boosting those synergistic gains, the things teams do better together, and actively stopping things that threaten performance.
Okay, this leads us perfectly into how teams actually think together, how they make decisions collectively. What are some of the most common ways group intelligence gets undermined? And maybe more importantly, what are the strategies to actually sharpen a team's collective mind?
Yeah, this is critical. A really common problem is perspective-taking failures. We humans are just remarkably bad at seeing things from someone else's viewpoint. We often suffer from what's called the curse of knowledge. Basically, if I know something, I unconsciously act as if you know it too, even if that's impossible. And that obviously severely hinders communication, problem solving, everything, really.
Wow. So if I know the background on Project X, I might just assume you do too, even if I never actually told you. That sounds like a recipe for major crossed wires.
It absolutely is. And to counteract that, teams that have really strong knowledge-sharing practices, they consistently get higher customer satisfaction, better overall performance. But here's the catch. A common information effect. This is huge. What determines how much a particular fact influences a group's decision isn't usually how important the fact is. It's how many people already knew that fact before the discussion started. Groups tend to spend way too much time discussing information that everyone already knows, and this bias gets even stronger when there's a lot of shared info available.
That totally explains why those moments when truly new information finally surfaces feel so significant, because they're rarer than they should be.
Exactly. And this can lead to what's called a hidden profile situation. This is where the objectively best decision or solution exists, but its superiority is hidden. Why? Because each team member only has a piece of the supporting information. Meanwhile, the information that everyone shares, the common stuff, actually points towards a different, inferior choice. Medical teams, for instance. Studies showed they often made incorrect diagnoses in these hidden profile cases because they over-relied on the easily available, commonly shared symptoms or data while missing the crucial pieces held by individuals. But they got standard cases right.
Okay, that's a serious problem. So how do we actively fight these ingrained information biases? How do we make sure the best, sometimes hidden information actually comes out?
There are definitely strategies. First, accountability. This is interesting. When teams know, they'll be held accountable for the process they used to make a decision, how they got there, not just the final outcome. They tend to make better decisions. They're more likely to dig up and discuss that unshared information. Second, build trust and familiarity. Teams where members know and trust each other, they're less likely to fall into that common information trap. A climate of cooperative interdependence just naturally encourages more sharing. This also helps develop what's called a transactive memory system, or TMS. It's basically a group mind. Members kind of implicitly know who knows what within the team. Oh, ask Sarah about that. She's the expert. That reduces coordination losses significantly.
It's just fascinating how groups can sometimes be so much smarter than any individual, but other times fall prey to these really basic cognitive traps.
That's the paradox, isn't it? And the challenge. Groups often do outperform individuals on certain tasks, like estimation problems, general world knowledge, and get this, on problems where there's a demonstrably correct answer. Groups outperform even their single most knowledgeable member about 97% of the time. Using structured approaches to decision-making really helps harness that collective intelligence.
Okay.
But yeah, teams are still vulnerable. Overconfidence bias is a big one. People overestimate how accurate their knowledge is. In teams, this can mean focusing only on your own strengths and totally underestimating competitors. And then there's confirmation bias, that powerful tendency we all have to seek out and favor evidence that confirms what we already believe and ignore or dismiss evidence that contradicts it, especially when our egos are tied up in a project.
And the classic one everyone talks about, groupthink, where everyone just wants to agree.
Groupthink. Yeah, a major pitfall. It happens when the group prioritizes consensus and harmony over critical thinking and realistic appraisal of alternatives. It's led to some historical disasters like the Bay of Pigs invasion or the escalation of the Vietnam War. To fight it, teams need ways for private expression of doubts, maybe anonymous feedback channels, or a designated devil's advocate role that rotates. It's also vital to actively invite different perspectives. Explicitly ask members to argue from the viewpoint of different stakeholders. Think about the Challenger disaster. An engineer raised serious warnings about the O-rings in cold weather, but those warnings were tragically downplayed or ignored in the push for consensus and launch. Actively seeking out and valuing dissenting perspectives could have changed everything.
What about when a team is clearly heading down the wrong path, making bad decisions, but just keeps going? They double down.
That's escalation of commitment. Persisting with a losing course of action, even when the feedback is clearly negative. What drives it? Well, psychological factors play a big role. Maybe personal rewards tied to the project process itself, or just plain ego investment. Ironically, people with higher self-esteem can sometimes be more vulnerable to this because they hate admitting they were wrong. Structural factors matter too. Projects can become institutionalized, gain political backing within the company, making them hard to kill. How do you avoid it? Clear risk management from the start, setting predefined limits on resources or time, actively seeking external, unbiased feedback. The book suggests having a really honest, collective discussion. Should we really continue this? And critically, fostering a culture where people can take responsibility for failure, where mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, not career enders, where you can own it, learn from it, and move on without fear. Like Menlo Innovation's philosophy, make mistakes faster, or Etsy giving awards for the best and worst team failures. Like the team that accidentally celebrates learning against the stigma.
That's fantastic. Turning failure into a positive to learning. What about the ethical side of team decisions?
That's another crucial area. A key danger is desensitization. Repeated exposure to unethical behavior can gradually wear down the team's internal compass, its checks and balances. The New Orleans Saints bounty system, where players were rewarded for injury performance. That's a really disturbing example of how norms can shift towards unethical behavior within a group. How to combat this? One remedy is shifting accountability, focusing on process accountability how decisions are made rather than just outcome tends to increase economic effectiveness. Also, encouraging contemplation, building in time for morally oriented conversation before making significant choices can lead teams towards more ethical decisions.
Okay, this has been a deep dive into the team itself, but teams don't operate in bubbles, right? How do they connect with the wider organization, and what's the leader's role in managing all this complexity?
Absolutely vital point. Teams are never islands. Their team environment relationships are critical. The book actually outlines several different ways teams orient themselves externally. You have insulated teams. They focus almost entirely inward, highly specialized. Think of the Los Alamos atomic bomb team, or maybe Xerox PR Data. The risk, they can become totally disconnected from the rest of the organization. They might fail to develop viable products, but lose essential internal support.
Right, so that they could be brilliant technically, but completely miss the mark organizationally.
Exactly. Then you have broadcasting teams. They mostly just inform others about what they're doing after they've already made the decision. Minimal interaction beforehand. Marketing teams focus outward, but mainly on gaining buy-in, advertising, and lobbying. They get high visibility, but may not actually be meeting true customer needs because they're focused on selling, not listening. Surveying teams are the opposite. They actively go out to diagnose customer needs, experiment, gather data, revise their understanding. These teams have huge potential for customer satisfaction, but it's costly, it takes time. And processing all that external feedback can stir up internal conflict. And finally, there are X teams. They're characterized by this dynamic cycle of exploration, exploitation, knowledge internally, and exportation, getting ideas back out, known for rapid execution prototyping.
Who are the key people managing these critical connections between the team and the outside world?
Those are the boundary spanners. These individuals play absolutely crucial roles. They control the flow of information to the team and from the team. They advise, they interpret external messages, they lobby for the team within the organization. Research clearly shows that effective boundary spanning, along with buffering the team from unnecessary distractions and reinforcing the team's identity, is positively linked to both team performance and psychological safety.
And I guess the structure of those external connections matters too, not just the people doing the spanning.
Oh, absolutely. You can think about the difference between cliques and boundary spanning networks. Clique networks, they're dense, very internal. Everyone knows everyone else within the group. The problem, they can stifle creativity because ideas just circulate internally. They can also propagate homogeneity bias, even prejudice, think echo chambers. Boundary spanning networks, on the other hand, are less dense. They connect the team to more unique, varied contacts outside the immediate group. This leads to more diverse information, broader perspectives. Expanding your network beyond the immediate clique is key.
And organizations sometimes have this weird bias about where good ideas come from, right? Like if it wasn't invented here.
Yes, the classic not invented here NIH syndrome. Overvaluing knowledge that comes from inside your own group, while dismissing or ignoring valuable knowledge from external sources. But interestingly, the reverse can happen too. Some managers overvalue external knowledge from consultants, competitors, while ignoring perfectly good insights generated internally. The book gives the example of Fresh Choice acquiring Zupa. Zupa had proven best practices, but once they were acquired and easily accessible internally, Fresh Choice management suddenly devalued them. Or how Xerox managers showed little interest in a new internal technology until a competitor developed something similar. Logically, you should embrace good ideas wherever they come from.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what does this mean for the leader trying to navigate this incredibly complex team landscape? It sounds like a massive juggling act.
It really underscores that leadership paradox we mentioned earlier. Teams usually need leaders, right? But the very act of leading, especially in a traditional directive way, can threaten the team's autonomy and potential. Which brings us back to that classic question. Are leaders born or made? The source looks at two main theories here.
The great man theory comes to mind again.
Exactly. That's the entity theory, or trait theory. It basically says leadership is an innate quality, something you're born with, it's fixed. These leaders tend to dictate, command. They often get way too much credit when things go well and too much blame when they don't. Leadership is seen as top-down one way. The alternative is the incremental theory. This view says leadership skills are learned, they develop over time through experience and effort. It focuses more on how leaders interact with their teams, how they structure the environment. Leadership here is seen as bidirectional. Leaders learn from their teams just as much as they guide them.
Does the research point to any gender differences in leadership styles or effectiveness?
It does suggest some interesting patterns. Statistically, women are less likely to emerge as leaders, both in lab studies and in the real world. However, when women do lead, they tend to exhibit more of what's called transformational leadership behaviors compared to men. And these specific behaviors are consistently linked to better team performance.
Okay, so what exactly makes a transformational leader so effective with teams?
Transformational leaders, they tend to have more satisfied subordinates. They profoundly influence the team's collective personality, fostering things like openness, agreeableness, extroversion, conscientiousness within the group. And this positive impact on the team's character directly translates to better performance, largely because the teams trust these leaders more deeply.
Does the leader's mood, or even just their perception of the team, affect how the team actually performs?
Oh, absolutely. It can have a surprising impact. For instance, a leader expressing anger. Counterintuitively, that can sometimes improve performance, but specifically in teams that have high epistemic motivation, a strong drive to understand things deeply. But teams with low epistemic motivation, they actually perform better when their leader expresses happiness. So it depends on the team's mindset. We also see that leader-team perceptual distance matters. When there's a big gap between how the leader sees things and how the team sees things, performance suffers, especially if the team's view is more positive than the leader's.
And what about favoritism, how leaders treat different members of the team, having an in-group versus an out-group?
Yeah, that's the whole area of leader-member exchange, LMX, or differential treatment. It's pretty natural for leaders to develop closer relationships with some subordinates than others, the in-group members. They tend to feel psychologically safer, they participate more, they often get bigger bonuses or better assignments. The danger is leaders might unconsciously rely too heavily on their inner circle, calling on them even when they don't actually have the best expertise for a specific task. This can breed resentment among the outgroup members, and it can ultimately hurt the team's overall effectiveness by lowering the self-efficacy of those who feel excluded.
So treating everyone exactly the same isn't necessarily the answer, but too much differentiation can backfire. What's the more effective path then?
Generally, participative management tends to be more effective. This is where leaders actively delegate authority downwards, empowering individuals and the team as a whole. It's strongly linked to more knowledge sharing, higher team efficacy, and better overall team performance. But, and this is crucial, the leadership style has to fit the organizational context. In traditional, hierarchical, bureaucratic organizations, participative leadership and empowered teams often get ignored or even actively suppressed. But in commitment organizations, those with flatter structures where teams are encouraged and power is shared, participative leadership can really thrive. The style needs to match the system.
Okay, now, so much work today happens with teams that aren't even in the same physical space. Let's shift to that virtual landscape. What are the unique challenges and maybe opportunities when teams work across distance and culture?
This is such a huge part of it. The place-time model of interaction is a useful way to think about it. It categorizes communication based on location, same place, or different place, sometimes in a different time. Face-to-face, obviously, is same place, same time, and it's still really considered the gold standard for tackling complex problems, kicking off relationships, resolving conflicts. It's actually kind of amazing. Research shows communication frequency just drops off logarithmically with physical distance. Even being just like 5 or 10 meters apart in an office makes a difference.
Wow, that's incredible. Just being down the hall changes things that much. So what about the different place, different time scenario, relying on email, shared docs, asynchronous stuff?
Yeah, that's where you really see the challenges of virtual communication kick in. There's often a huge lost in translation problem. People consistently overestimate how well they can convey tone, sarcasm, sincerity, urgency in writing, especially email. Messages get misunderstood all the time because you lose all those paralinguistic cues, tone of voice, and the nonverbal stuff, facial expressions, body language.
Yeah.
Even though, interestingly, emotional contagion can still happen through text, a lot of nuance just gets stripped away.
So that carefully worded email I spent an hour crafting might just land completely flat, or worse, be totally misread. Explains a lot.
It really does. But there's an interesting flip side. Virtual communication can sometimes lead to reduced status differences. It's sometimes called the weak get strong effect. Why?
Right.
Because those traditional status cues, fancy title, corner office status cues, or even how someone dresses, their age, gender, dynamic cues, they're just less obvious or totally missing online. This often means high-status people are less likely to dominate the conversation compared to face-to-face meetings. You're less likely to get one person hogging the floor.
Okay, that sounds like a potential upside. More equal footing for ideas, maybe. What are the big downsides you see consistently, though?
A major one is definitely increased time to make decisions. Virtual groups often take significantly longer. The book says maybe 4 to 10 times longer to reach a decision, probably because more diverse opinions might actually surface more easily. But coordinating that takes time, and building deep trust and rapport in virtual teams, that's just way harder than face-to-face. Trust in virtual settings tends to be based more on cognitive stuff. Do I think this person is competent? Do they know their stuff? The affective side, things like benevolence, integrity. Do I feel like they have my back? That's much harder to gauge without that personal interaction.
Okay, so given these hurdles, what actually makes virtual teams work? What are the success factors?
Well, the key factors seem to boil down to a few things.
Cool.
Their actual geographic locations relative to each other. Time zones matter. The amount of face-to-face time they do manage to get, even if it's infrequent, and the quality of the technical support they have. But the biggest persistent challenge for productivity, it's simply coordinating the effort across distance and time zones. And maybe unsurprisingly, virtual teams also tend to experience more process conflict disagreements about how to do the work than teams working side by side.
All right, to kind of bring this all home, let's talk about something almost every team experiences, often painfully: meetings. So many of us dread them. What are the typical problems, and how can we make meetings genuinely effective, not just something to endure?
You are definitely not alone in that dread. It's amazing the extreme things managers resort to, like the source mentions removing chairs from meeting rooms or locking doors, all because meetings are often so ineffective. The book highlights some classic problematic meeting personalities you've probably run into. Thelma Talk-a-lot, who just dominates the whole discussion. Sam Stahl, who finds endless ways to delay making a decision. Don Domineering, who talks 75% of the time, usually about his own ideas. And Nick Negative, who's always the devil's advocate, sometimes just for the sake of it.
Oh man, I think we've all sat in meetings with variations of those. So if you're the one facilitating the meeting, what are the absolute must-do tips?
Okay, top tips for facilitators. First, do your homework before the meeting even starts. Research the group, understand the company context, get background on the members if you can, ideally. Conduct short, individual interviews beforehand. Understand people's views, their concerns, and guarantee anonymity. This builds trust and gives you invaluable insight into the dynamics you'll be facing. Second, when you start, explain who you are and why you were there. Be really clear. You're a neutral facilitator, not a stakeholder with an agenda. And it helps to normalize the situation. Maybe share a quick statistic about how common meeting challenges are. It helps people relax, realize their frustrations are shared, and sets a constructive tone.
Okay, good prep work. And once the meeting is actually underway, how should it be structured for maximum effectiveness?
For an effective meeting structure, think about two things: content and process. For content, think about the physical setup. Are whiteboards needed? Displays, make sure they're ready. Assign someone specifically to take notes. For process, start by clearly restating the meeting's purpose. Review the agenda and the agreed-upon time limits. Super important. Explicitly state the ground rules, especially how decisions will be made. Consensus-majority vote, leader decides. During the meeting, Actively use techniques to encourage participation from everyone, not just the loudest voices. And then wrap up effectively. Summarize the key decisions made, review who was responsible for what action items, and set clear objectives for the next meeting or next steps.
That's a really solid, practical framework. Any final kind of hidden traps to watch out for in meetings?
Yeah, one subtle but common one is decision avoidance disguised as diligence. Sometimes a team will keep requesting more information, more data, as a way to put off making a difficult or unpopular decision, even if the extra information isn't actually likely to change anything. It becomes a way to justify delaying the inevitable, especially with tough calls like, say, shutting down a struggling project or making cuts. Reflecting on all this, what really stands out to me is how often our gut instincts about teamwork. Well, they aren't actually the most effective path. Getting teams right is definitely dynamic. It's complex, no doubt about it. But the good news is it really is a learnable skill. It just demands a real understanding of human nature, recognizing how organizational structures shape behavior, and being really conscious about the tools we use and how we interact. It's fascinating how often the intuitive way isn't the best way.
Yeah, I'm really struck by that too. And the power of just stopping to critically examine our own assumptions, our biases, like that common information effect, just knowing about it makes you think differently, right? Or the egocentric bias when it comes to feedback. It feels like so much of this is about consciously designing our interactions to work around those subtle human tendencies that can, quietly sabotage even groups with the best intentions. So thinking about everything we've unpacked today, from the different team types, reward systems, navigating those decision traps, the whole virtual collaboration piece, how might you, our listener, in your very next team effort, how might you proactively design things? How can you set the stage to really foster trust, to genuinely leverage all the diverse knowledge sitting around the table and guard against those subtle human tendencies we talked about? What concrete steps could you take right now to maybe transform how your team tackles challenges? Especially knowing that sometimes maybe the bravest thing a team can do isn't just succeeding, but being able to frankly say, okay, that didn't work, learn from it, and move forward stronger.